There is a kind of exhaustion that does not show up in the body. It is not resolved with rest. It does not improve with vacations. It does not disappear when the day ends. It is an internal, silent, accumulated exhaustion. It is born from the feeling of always starting over on the inside, even when, on the outside, everything seems to be moving. You move forward, change settings, change people, change plans, but something remains the same. It is not a lack of effort. It is not laziness. It is invisible repetition. You may have asked yourself more than once why life seems to demand so much from you and give so little in return. Why everything costs more. Why every attempt at stability seems to slip through your fingers. And at some point, the most dangerous doubt of all arises. Am I falling behind? This question does not come from curiosity. It comes loaded with weight, with silent comparison, with a diffuse sense of inadequacy. What is rarely said is that this exhaustion is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of prolonged survival. When someone spends a long time trying to stay whole in unstable environments, learning to adapt in order not to lose bonds, security, or belonging, the internal system enters repetition mode, not because the person wants to, but because that is how they learn to keep existing. There is a profound difference between being behind and being stuck. Being behind suggests incapacity. Being stuck suggests excessive adaptation. And excessive adaptation is not born from weakness. It is born from necessity. You did not become who you are by accident. Every internal adjustment had a function. Every silence had a reason. Every postponement was, at some point, a way of protecting yourself. Perhaps you learned early on that insisting was safer than ending things, that enduring was more acceptable than disappointing, that waiting was better than losing. And these lessons did not come as conscious choices. They came as responses to the environment. They came as possible solutions within what was emotionally available at the time. That is why, when today you feel that life is not moving, that the same situations repeat themselves under different names, that the scenery changes, but the feeling remains the same. The problem is not your ability to move forward. It is the internal logic that still operates as if danger were constant, as if loss were inevitable, as if stability had to be earned through continuous sacrifice. This exhaustion does not ask for more strength. It asks for recognition, because no one can sustain for long the feeling of constantly rebuilding themselves without beginning to doubt themselves. And doubt corrodes in silence. It does not scream. It wears you down. It makes a person believe that they are the problem, when in truth the problem is the repetition of a pattern that has already fulfilled its function but has not yet been brought to an end. You are not failing for feeling this way. You are not being ungrateful, weak, or complacent. You are simply noticing something that once had to be ignored in order to survive, and noticing hurts because it removes the anesthesia. It removes the illusion of movement. It shows that the effort is not taking you where you expected to go. There is a specific kind of loneliness in this process. It is the loneliness of someone who appears functional but internally feels stuck, of someone who receives praise but does not feel progress, of someone who understands rationally that everything is fine but emotionally feels that something is always unreso. Recognizing this is not self-victimization. It is stopping blaming yourself for something that was never a free choice. It is understanding that you did not start this cycle, but you sustained it because you did not know another way. And that does not diminish you. It explains you. Perhaps, for the first time, it is possible to look at this exhaustion without trying to eliminate it quickly, without trying to turn it into motivation, without trying to use it as fuel. Because it is not fuel, it is a signal that continuing in the same way is no longer possible, even if changing still feels confusing. You are not behind in life. You are tired of repeating, and repetition, when carried on for too long, exhausts even the strongest. What you feel now is not the end, It is the limit, and recognizing the limit is not giving up. It is beginning to see. The pattern that repeats itself is rarely obvious. It seldom appears as a clear mistake or a consciously wrong decision. Most of the time, it shows up as automatic choices, predictable reactions, silent insistence. It is an internal mode of functioning that operates before reflection, before logic, before declared intention. This pattern can express itself in many ways, but they all share the same root: the difficulty of ending cycles when they stop being nourishing. Not out of a romantic attachment to suffering, but out of fear of the emptiness that an ending creates. For those who learn to survive by adapting, emptiness is not rest. Emptiness is a threat, so you continue. You continue in relationships that are already emotionally exhausted. You continue in projects that do not move forward but consume energy. You continue waiting for signs, changes, recognition that rarely arrive. And in the meantime, life feels suspended, as if it were always about to truly begin, but never does. The cost of this pattern is silent, yet profound. It does not destroy all at once. It wears you down gradually. It erodes inner trust, undermines the sense of continuity, fragments identity. A person begins to feel as if they are always in transition, always provisional, always waiting for a better moment to finally take a position. This way of functioning made sense at some point. Perhaps it was necessary to maintain important bonds. Perhaps it was the only way to avoid greater conflicts. Perhaps it ensured belonging when the alternative was abandonment. At some point in the story, insisting was the best option available. The problem is not the past. The problem is when the past keeps deciding the present, when the strategy that once protected you begins to limit you, when the same movement that prevented losses starts to block progress. A pattern does not become harmful because it is wrong, but because it becomes obsolete. There is also the fear of assuming the cost of ending things. Ending is not just saying no, it is tolerating frustration, guilt, possible loneliness, the discomfort of holding a choice without an immediate guarantee of reward. For those who spent a long time regulating themselves through others, this inner support feels far too risky, so the pattern repeats. Not because you do not know what to do, but because you know exactly what you would lose if you did it, at least in the short term. The emotional brain prefers familiar pain to unknown risk. It prefers predictable instability to stability that requires rupture. And meanwhile, time passes. Not clock time, but inner time. The time in which things are meant to integrate, mature, and consolidate. When this time does not unfold, a sense of delay appears. But the delay is not on the timeline. It lies in remaining in cycles that have already given everything they had to give. This pattern also shows up in the way you perceive yourself. There is a tendency to over-responsibilize, to try to understand everything, to justify other people's behavior, to wait for clarity before making a decision, as if it were possible to resolve the impasse simply by thinking better. But this is not a problem of understanding. It is a problem of inner permission. Permission to change position without needing a flawless justification. Permission to end things even without consensus. Permission to choose emotional stability instead of repetitive intensity. The pattern demands a high price because it requires constant presence in situations that no longer offer proportional return. It consumes energy that could be invested in continuity, but is instead spent on maintenance of fragile bonds, maintenance of old expectations, maintenance of an identity built to please or to avoid loss. None of this makes you flawed. It makes you someone who learned early to shape yourself, but there comes a point when shaping too much makes you lose form, and living without a clear form generates exhaustion, because everything requires effort. Seeing the pattern is not self-accusation, it is contextualization. It is understanding that what today prevents progress was once the reason for survival, but continuing to live from it now costs far too much. Recognizing this cost does not require immediate decisions. It requires honesty, honesty about what repeats, about what does not change, about what you keep calling a phase when it has already become a structure. You are not stuck because you do not try. You are stuck because you keep trying in the same way, and what once worked now only keeps you in the same place. Ending an internal cycle is not a dramatic act. It does not require confrontations, declarations, or spectacular turning points. Most of the time, it is a silent movement, an inner repositioning that happens before any visible external change. It is the moment when you stop negotiating with yourself about what you already know. This direction is not born from force, because force exhausts. It is born from clarity. Clarity about what can no longer be sustained. Clarity about the cost of continuing. Clarity about the kind of stability you truly seek, even if you have never named it before. Growth is not acceleration. Prosperity is not intensity. For those who have lived a long time in emotional repetition, growth means stabilizing. It means stopping living in constant response to internal fires. It means building continuity, even if that feels less exciting at first. This new inner posture does not ask for heroic courage. It asks for quiet firmness, the ability to remain in your own decision without needing to convince anyone, the willingness to hold boundaries without turning them into punishment or attack. The maturity to understand that ending is not destroying, it is completing. This silent direction also involves accepting that not everything will be emotionally resolved before the change. Some things only organize themselves afterward. Waiting to feel absolute certainty before moving is part of the old pattern. True clarity is not the absence of fear, it is the presence of discernment. Emotional stability is not the absence of conflict. It is the capacity to move through conflict without losing yourself. It is knowing where you end and where the other begins. It is not needing to constantly adapt in order to maintain a minimal sense of safety. When you begin to position yourself from this place, life does not immediately become easier, but it becomes more coherent, and coherence generates energy. Not the euphoric energy of impulsive beginnings, but the steady energy of someone who does not need to rebuild themselves all the time. This change does not require you to abandon everything. It requires you to abandon the logic that keeps you trapped. The logic that says insisting is always a virtue, that enduring is always a sign of maturity, that waiting indefinitely is proof of love or loyalty. There is a difference between patience and chronic postponement, between commitment and self-abandonment, between understanding and excessive tolerance. Silent direction is born when these differences stop being mere concepts and begin to guide internal decisions. You do not need to announce this change. You do not need to explain. You do not need to justify. Often the more silent it is, the more solid it becomes, because it does not depend on external reaction to sustain itself. Over time, the pattern loses strength not because it was fought, but because it stopped being fed. What once felt automatic begins to require effort to repeat, and when repeating becomes more exhausting than changing, something naturally reorganizes itself. Prosperity in this context is not about accumulating, it is about maintaining presence, maintaining clarity, maintaining continuity. It is not having to start over internally with every setback. It is being able to make mistakes without completely falling apart. You are not behind. You were caught in a logic that no longer serves you. And recognizing this does not require haste. It requires honesty with yourself. Life does not begin when everything is resolved. It begins when you stop repeating what you have already understood.